office of President of the United States.
And preserve, protect, and defend.
He promised to put America first. Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. Welcome to Washington for a special edition marking the first anniversary of the inauguration of Donald Trump. No one was quite sure how a real estate magnate come reality TV star would govern. 1 year on, Washington is a very different place. We're going to see how the U.S. sees itself on the world stage. And we'll go to Moscow, to Mexico, to the Middle East to see how the rest of the planet is adapting to the new normal here.
We begin in the Rayburn Congressional Office Building across from the Capitol, and we say hello to Congressman Lamar Smith from Texas. Thank you for welcoming us to your office.
Delighted to be on your program, and you do have a magnificent view, and we've talked about that as well, but appreciate your interest and look forward to any questions you might have.
Now, you're somebody with a lot of perspective. You were a freshman congressman in 1987. Ronald Reagan was the president.
Correct.
And this is your last term under Donald Trump.
That is right. I've announced I'm not running for re-election. That's correct.
Reagan was known as the great communicator. How is Donald Trump going to be known?
Well, he is certainly a communicator and a great one in his own way. He is communicating in ways that no other president have communicated. And, of course, when you go back through the history, you have, literally verbal speeches, and then you have radio, then you have TV. Now we have tweets and Twitter. And that is how this president has chosen to communicate, largely, I think, to get around the so-called mainstream media. They have not, in my view, treated him fairly. They have been unduly harsh. They've been critical every single day. And so one way that the president has to respond to that kind of criticism is to go directly to the people through his tweets.
But overriding the media in the U.S., okay, but the rest of the world can be a little jittery when they see those tweets. It has them on edge. Right. When he, taunts the North Korean leader, doesn't that make you jittery?
Well, as I say, he has a different way of communicating, but I don't think people should be put off by a new form of communication. Yes, there's an adjustment period. Yes, this is the first president to have communicated by way of tweets, and sometimes the tweets serve purposes that aren't necessarily obvious to people when they see the tweets. He has been unnecessarily harsh on some individuals. On the other hand, and to take North Korea as an example, for the first time in 6 years, North Koreans are now willing to sit down with South Korea. I think President Trump arguably was a catalyst for that happening.
Donald Trump doesn't like big agreements. The difference with Reagan was when he stared down the Soviets, right? He had that close relationship with Margaret Thatcher. He got NATO on board, the French on board. This go-it-alone approach of Donald Trump, is it isolating the United States?
Well, I don't know that it really is isolating the United States in this sense. Diplomacy is being practiced by this administration. Sometimes it's like it has been in the past. Sometimes it is not. And you have an individual, the president, who is willing to, I think, do more things on his own, take more initiatives himself. But so far, not only has that not hurt the United States, in some cases, I think it's led to some breakthroughs.
Like where?
We have a Secretary of State. Well, for example, in our relations with countries that have been our adversaries in the past, I think they have more respect for the United States than they did under the administration, for example.
Which ones?
Pick any country, Iran, any of the other terrorist-producing countries. Now, I think, respect us. Maybe they even fear us a little bit more than they did under the Obama administration. And so we'll see where that goes over time. But so far, the diplomacy under our Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, has been very much along norms, if you look past for the last 10 or 20 years. And as far as the president...
Right, but that's the Secretary of State. What happens in the White House is a different story. And when you hear, for instance, France's president talking about let's make the planet great again. You're the chair of the House Science Committee. What's your reaction?
To what again?
He says make the planet great again. And
well...
Emmanuel Macron, by the way, he's convinced convinced that Donald Trump will stick with the Paris climate change agreement. He thinks he can convince him.
Two questions there. First, let me respond to the Paris climate change agreement, but also respond to how other countries might view the president. Clearly, he was elected to put America first, to make America great again. And I think it's taking other countries a period of adjustment to recognize that this is a president that really meant what he said. He really is going to look out for the interests of America. As he said, he was elected president of the United States, not president of some other country. And there is an adjustment period, I understand on that. On the Paris Agreement, the president wants to try to withdraw from that. He hasn't executed that in total yet. But I think he has good reasons to do so for this reason. If all 195 countries that are part of the Paris Agreement were to completely implement those agreements, total implementation, we know that's not going to happen, but just say theoretically that all 195 countries implemented everything they said they were going to, that would result in only that would result and have an impact of only preventing an increase in global temperatures by 1/6 of a degree.
So it wouldn't be enough. But
so in other words, it has no significant impact whatsoever.
But the world has gotten to be a smaller place, and this is typically one issue where you need the whole planet on board.
Right, but even if you have the whole planet on board with the Paris Agreement, again, it would only reduce global temperatures by 1/6 of a degree, and yet it would cost trillions of dollars. That's literally the definition of all pain and no gain.
You're a congressman from Texas, a state that borders Mexico. You, in the past, as chair of the House Judiciary Committee, have drafted immigration legislation that got bipartisan approval. The mood right now is, well, shall we say, caustic in Washington in terms of the polarization between Democrats and Republicans. There's this sense that there's a real anti-immigrant feeling, is there?
Oh, of course not. We do have a president who wants to enforce immigration laws. Of course, his opponents are going to use that and say that means he's anti-immigrant. It doesn't at all. It simply means that we need to enforce our immigration laws. And he wants to, and I agree with this, change the mix a little bit and admit more immigrants to the United States who we know will contribute to the economy, who have the skills and education that we need in America. That's, again, putting America first. And don't forget, we're the most generous country in the world. We admit 1 million legal immigrants every year. That's about as many immigrants as every other country combined. And that generosity is going to continue. But with that generosity comes our obligation and responsibility to admit individuals who are going to contribute to America.
When he uses explicatives to characterize certain countries, do you agree with him?
Well, I wasn't in the room. I don't know what he said. He denies it. And actually, there's...
You're not going to get into that.
No. That's all I can say is I'm disappointed in our national media to use those words.
For leaking it.
Yeah, well, use those words 24 hours a day where our children are seeing it and everything else. So I don't know what he said, and he himself denies it.
How about getting along with the neighbors? The talk about the fence and also, you know, the North American Free Trade Agreement.
Right.
Keep it or get rid of it?
Well, the president has not said get rid of it. He just wants to renegotiate some provisions. And actually, Mexico and Canada have also both said, well, we do need to update, for instance, the intellectual property provisions. And so when we come right down to it, we're not going to abolish it. We're not going to get rid of it. But we are going to modernize it. And I think we can do so in a way that doesn't hurt Mexico and doesn't hurt Canada and make sure that we keep our jobs here in America.
All right, the stakes are very high. Thank you very much, Congressman Smith. The stakes are high indeed, as we're going to see on both sides of the Mexican border.
Behind these shelves in a Mexican supermarket lurks a major diplomatic crisis. This cane sugar's homegrown, but almost all the manufactured products, like the cereal and soft drinks, are made with corn syrup or fructose. That's how processed food is sweetened in the United States. Here in Sucrolik, south of the capital, they're making liquid cane sugar. But all the sugar in the world can't get rid of the bitter taste left by the last round of trade agreements.
The agreements they reached are completely unfair. They favour American interests. It's all because of these new agreements that here, Sucrolik can't export out liquid sugar to the US. Mexico could produce enough refined cane sugar for both its domestic market and for export.
Mexico could produce enough refined cane sugar for both its domestic market and for export. But its hands are tied. Last June, the United States drastically limited imports of Mexican sugar. Their goal was to keep their own sugar refineries in business. Now the US is buying Mexican unrefined sugar at rock-bottom prices and exporting corn syrup to its neighbour. It's a lower quality product than the cane sugar equivalent, but big food companies based in Mexico can use it to increase their profit margins. Enrique has a fight ahead of him to stay in the game.
Obviously, if Mexico wasn't importing this American corn syrup, our sales would start to grow exponentially. Mexico can survive NAFTA. It's not acceptable that 80% of our foreign trade is dependent on the United States, when we have 49 trade agreements with the rest of the world.
Many of the hopes and promises that came with the North American Free Trade Agreement 25 years ago haven't materialized. For Mexican sugar producers, NAFTA feels anything but free.
One person for whom the border may shut is Claudia. She's 23, lives in Maryland. She's from Bolivia, and you're with an organization called
United We Dream.
Thank you for speaking with us here.
Thank you for having me today.
Your organization has been lobbying Congress over the so-called Dreamer Act of 2012. People like you were in high school at the time, undocumented, and the Obama administration passes this bill to allow the children of undocumented workers to be able to stay. At that point in time, you thought, that's it, my American dream has started for good?
So in 2012, President Barack Obama passed an executive order, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. And it basically gave people like myself the opportunity to stay in this nation for the period of 2 years. And it meant that for those 2 years, our deportations would be deferred, and we could get a work permit.
And when that moment happens, do you think to yourself, I'm still in limbo here? Or do you think to yourself, did you breathe a little easier?
It definitely gave me more opportunities. It gave me the opportunity to get a driver's license, to go to school, to thrive, but I'm still in the limbo. I don't have access to many opportunities like other American citizens.
So you're now in college.
Correct.
What's your dream? What's your American dream?
So my dream is to one day go to law school and help my community. Right now, I'm studying political science with a minor in physics.
Nearly half your life you've spent here, and you came here at the age of 11, I believe you said?
Yes, 11.
11, and here you are in a Senate office building, lobbying politicians on Capitol Hill. How do you think it's gone so far?
In 2010, Congress was so close to passing the DREAM Act, but it fell by 2 votes. Now, 8 years later, we have more knowledge, and we are no longer afraid. We are willing.
No longer afraid, but it sounds like your dream might be slipping away if the Trump administration has its way.
Right. I have always said that even if when I had DACA, I had been and was undocumented, and I'm still undocumented. And I'm going to continue fighting and pushing for a legislation that would give me a pathway for citizenship, and would continue let me do what I'm doing, which is working, going to school, and helping my community.
But Donald Trump says, I can't let in everybody.
Right. There are people who have been here for many years. They're taxpayers. They are parishioners at churches, and they're like any other American citizen, right? The only difference is that many times they don't have a social security number, and that many times they can be separated from their families and be deported.
So today, would you, if you had to do it all over again, would you have come to the United States?
Yeah, most definitely. Because I'm here, I have a better future. I have a very good education, and I have been able to grow in so many ways. I'm a community leader who teaches others how to not be afraid, how to navigate the system, and how to be empowered. And I know that if I were back in Bolivia, I wouldn't have the experiences that I have lived here, and I wouldn't be the person who I am today.
Well, Claudia, best of luck, and we hope your American dream comes true. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Now, Claudia mentioning how perceptions are changing in her native Bolivia. In the Americas, immigration is definitely the question. In other parts of the world, how this administration is impacting the rest of the world plays out in different ways. Case in point with France 24's team in Jerusalem.
There's a building boom in Efrat, in the Gush Etzion block in the West Bank. And there will soon be dozens more Jewish families here. The settlers are delighted. They say that without the election of Donald Trump in the US, this construction would still be stalled.
He has managed to bring into a situation where we know that we have more units in the pipeline of planning progress, which was completely frozen during the Obama administration. And we also know that there is some sort of mechanism that the Israeli government is allowed to market land and properties in Judea and Samaria.
The pace of construction is not fast enough for the settlers, but they're convinced that it will expand more quickly now that Donald Trump's in office. Of course, for Palestinians and the NGOs working with them, it's bad news.
Trump has tacitly given the green light to Israel to expand settlements, making it more difficult for Israel to disentangle from the West Bank in the two-state solution, making it harder to imagine a viable Palestinian state.
Donald Trump's decision to recognise Jerusalem as the capital of Israel may be symbolic for the moment, but it shook Palestinians and the entire Muslim world. Palestinians now reject Donald Trump as a mediator in the peace process, which itself is on life support. They say they fear Trump may still have a further negative impact on Palestinian interests.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Middle East policy here at Politics and Prose, a bookstore on Connecticut Avenue. And I'm pleased to be joined by Robert Malley, President and CEO of International Crisis Group, former advisor to Barack Obama to the White House on Middle East policy. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Former advisor to then-candidate Donald Trump, Walid Fares, often a guest in the France 24 debate, and whose book, The Lost Spring, came out in 2014. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
Let's cut to the chase. We saw in that report the anger sparked by Donald Trump's decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And now this announcement that there's going to be the cutting in half of the budget to the UN body that provides relief to the Palestinians, UNRWA. What impact is that going to have?
Well, I think you've got to see these decisions as part of a whole litany of decisions that have really led the Palestinians to doubt that they have any way forward. So you've had failed peace processes, an Israeli government that doesn't believe in a two-state solution, problems on the Palestinian side too, a leadership that is divided, that's been ineffective. And so these statements by President Trump and the decision to cut in half the assistance to UNRWA with all its humanitarian implications, it just has basically thrown the Palestinians in a different place where they're now wondering who they should partner with, who the head of who should be the mediator of the peace process, what their goals should be. Is a two-state solution still viable? And I think we're really witnessing a turning of the page on the Palestinian side.
Turning of the page on the Palestinians. So concretely, what does it mean, cutting that in?
It doesn't know. They don't know what it means. It means that they have to rethink their strategy. They have to rethink how they're doing things, with whom they're doing things. It may not amount to much, frankly, because their options are not very good. But it means that they're calling into question so much of what they had held on to for so long.
Because some are saying, Walid Fares, that this could mean problems not just in the Palestinian territories, but in places like Jordan and Lebanon.
I think this is turning the page on the old peace process and trying to go towards a new peace process, with one exception.
How could it be going towards a new peace process when you're cutting humanitarian aid?
Because the old peace process was basically staying where it was just by sending foreign aid and nothing would happen. Hamas would control Gaza. The PLO was not able to reform. Iran was trying to play through Hezbollah against that peace process. It needs to change. So the cutting off of aid is not about the Palestinians. It's about the process. The Palestinians may get 10 times more aid if the plan of President Trump would work. That's what I have an observation. But basically, the initial idea through the administration is that candidate Trump wanted two-state solution. He's not changing. He wanted the Arab coalition that he formed in Riyadh to be the one to help him bring in the Palestinians and then go and engage with the Israelis. Something has happened. He changed course, but not the strategy. And the course would be to give the Israelis what they always wanted without taking away from the Palestinians a right to take part of Jerusalem.
A right to...
I think what changed, I don't know if Walid would agree, it's not they have a change of tactic or strategy. What changed is domestic politics in the U.S. President Trump wanted to live up to a commitment that he made during his campaign, and some members of his administration believe in strongly, which is that they'd recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. In my view, this has nothing to do with foreign policy. In fact, it has only bad, harmful effects in terms of foreign policy, relations with the Palestinians, relations with Arab, relations with Europe. It isolates the United States. It has one benefit for President Trump. It's the domestic payoff that he thinks he expects to get from it. But it's very hard.
Neither of you sound that alarmed by the fact that he's moving this embassy.
I don't know why. I don't know that my words haven't denoted alarm. I'm alarmed by what's happening on the ground. I mean, much more than that. I do think it was an own goal. It was a mistake. It's something that's going to further alienate the Palestinians from the U.S. It's going to further alienate the Palestinians from their own leadership and from the Arab world. But the main concern, I think, for Palestinians and for others who care about a two-state solution is what's happening on the ground and the fact that we're moving further and further away from the possibility of a two-state solution. So I think that there's reason to be enormously alarmed for all kinds of reasons.
Picking up on that precept. Go ahead.
Two quick points, if I may, quickly, and then we'll go to the point. Number one, I do admit that domestic politics took a large segment of the decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem, not to change the demographics of Jerusalem, not to say that Jerusalem won't be also for the Palestinians. And he kept in his narrative, that's the president, open the question of the borders of Jerusalem. But second, the old process was not moving forward. This process is maybe risky, we should be alarmed, yes, but all depends on the relationship between this administration and the Arab countries.
But has the United States forfeited its position as the go-to mediator?
I think the United States wants to be the mediator, but it wants to have other mediators as well, because this is not just something that the U.S. can solve between Israelis and Palestinians, because there's the question of funding. There's the question of disabling Iran from moving through the Palestinian arena and then blocking. But what was blocking the peace process was basically Hamas and Hezbollah. So that has to change. That's why the President Trump...
we could have a long discussion about what's blocking the peace process. I don't think it was, I think saying it was just Hamas and Hezbollah, there's 1,000 other reasons. I'm not sure those were the main ones. But to answer your point about is the U.S. forfeited its role, I think Walid is right that President Trump did say, oh, this doesn't prejudge the outcome of Jerusalem, although the next week he said, I've taken Jerusalem off the table, which makes it hard for the Palestinians to think that there's anything more to negotiate. But he certainly has done a lot of harm to any sense that a Palestinian leader can say that he's going to work with this administration because of the discredit that it would throw upon that leader vis-a-vis his own the Palestinian people. Right now, the Palestinian people view the Trump administration as a hostile administration, and any Palestinian leader that would welcome or react positively to anything this administration does is going to be cutting himself even more from his people. So I think it has done long-term damage. But again, my concern is that the peace process had been, as Walid said, has been on standstill for a very long time. Events on the ground were taking control of where things were going. And this is, in a way, the straw that breaks the camel's back, but it's not the strategic shift. Many other things were creating that.
A year on, people are still wondering, why did he pick his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to be the Middle East mediator?
He trusts him. I mean, I'm not. For me, that's not the. Again, you know, if Jared Kushner could come up with a great plan that would meet Palestinian-Israeli aspirations, I couldn't care if he's the son, daughter, nephew of the president. What I care about is what are they actually going to do with this? And so far, I've seen very little, and everything they've done is going to make it very hard for them to put forward a proposal that's going to be received with any sense of credibility on the Palestinian side.
Now, Donald Trump's other big ally in the region is Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make? How close will Saudi Arabia and Israel become? Some are talking about a normalization of ties.
They were very close until the decision on the embassy. I don't think it did change in depth, but I think the Saudis now are maneuvering to absorb what the results of moving the embassy were. But the Saudis and the Israelis were getting very close. and that was basically connected to the changes done inside Saudi Arabia. For any new reformist leader, young in this case, to change his foreign policy.
Is he really reformist, though, or is he just, kicking out the old guard because he's a young Turk?
If you look at the matter related to women or youth or reforms, the religious police, I mean, if you add them all together, this has not been done in 40 years. So I'm not praising him that he's the final, decision maker on all the changes, but he is somebody who is interested in change.
Somebody who's interested in change. Does that alliance with Israel seem like a natural one with Saudi Arabia?
They have a common enemy, Iran, and I think that's what's driving them together. I do think, coming back to the Palestinian question, Palestinians are very worried that Saudi Arabia might agree to an American plan because they're close to the U.S., because they want a rapprochement with Israel, against the wishes of the Palestinians. That's a real cause of anxiety among Palestinians. Yes, I think this Saudi leadership, and they've said it, they said it quite openly, they would like to see the day where they could have an even closer relationship with Israel. I think they're going to find it very hard to do that if the Palestinian question is, if not resolved, moving in the direction towards a fair resolution.
All right, so the Palestinian question is still hanging there, but that common enemy is as well Iran. Our team in the capital, Tehran, taking a look at how they see this Trump administration.
Donald Trump's fiery rhetoric has not endeared him to Iranians. Here at the Tehran Bazaar, everyone's got something to say about the man in the White House who regularly threatens to get tough on Iran. Trump recently voiced support for anti-government protesters, but still he denies Iranians visas to the U.S.
He's a businessman, not a politician like Putin, for example. All he sees is money, and he talks too much.
He can threaten us all he likes, but there's no reason to be afraid. There's no point in insulting us. Let him talk if he wants to. But if he wants to do good, then may he do it.
With the lifting of sanctions in 2016, the Islamic Republic was able to start selling its oil abroad and signed millions of euros worth of contracts with European companies.
Mr. Trump and the US's threats are creating a climate of uncertainty. Whether you're talking about orders for aeroplanes, the automobile industry, or oil and gas, large contracts have been put on hold until American decisions are made public.
Ever since Trump decertified the nuclear deal, there's been concern in Iran over the future of this historic agreement.
We're back at the Politics and Prose bookstore in Washington, D.C. with Robert Malley, the president and CEO of International Crisis Group, and with former Trump advisor Walid Fares. And we were seeing in that report questions, hostility, and also feeling the squeeze from the sanctions that are continuing, even though there was that 2015 agreement. Donald Trump now saying that he's giving the other signatories to that a nuclear agreement 4 months to come up with a better plan. Is that just bluster, or is he going to really walk away from it all?
I don't know if he's going to walk away in 4 months. We thought he would do so earlier, but I think that the Trump administration, in general terms, their assessment and analysis of Iran today is that there are two Irans. The one you've interviewed, people who have the courage to, blast the United States and support their government, the business people who are, of course, profiting from that agreement and deal. And then you have the other Iran on YouTube, on Twitter, the one we've seen over the past few weeks, the demonstrators, the reformers, and those who are against the regime. So he probably is investing in that second Iran to put pressure on this Iran to change the behavior, and he gave them 4 months, which explains to me that he may not actually recertify, or he could, depending on results on the ground.
The sanctions the unilateral sanctions were not going to be lifted anytime soon anyway. So why the need to pressure the other members of the Security Council plus Germany, the other members who signed on to that nuclear deal now?
He wants them for something else. That deal, the same deal, let me say this. If there is a change in Iran, is a good deal. Imagine if there is a better government, that deal would be like South Africa or Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when they came to the United Nations and told them, come and help us remove everything. It's the issue of strategic intention of this regime. But the Europeans, he's telling them, okay, we'll keep the deal. Would you be with us to stop the missiles? French president would. Would you be with us to support the human rights in Iran?
Ballistic missiles, which are not part of the...
Which are not part of the deal.
The deal. Let me ask you, Robert Malley, the current administration in Washington, from abroad, it seems very militarized, lots of former military brass in top civilian positions. A military brass that came of age in the 1980s, in the early 80s, when there was the Iran hostage crisis, when there was the attack against the Marine base in Beirut in 1983. Does that cloud their vision of Iran today?
I think it shapes their vision, but I want to come back to some of the points that Walid was making. Number one, I mean, this is a deal that's working. I think we should start with that. It's a deal that is working in terms of the goals that had been set. And if you go back a few years when people were alarmed at the thought that Iran may acquire a nuclear bomb, at a minimum, this deal, other than prohibiting them and Iran agreeing that never will develop a bomb, at a minimum for 10, 12, 15 years, they can't develop a bomb. So I think let's put that number one. Number two, it's very popular in Iran, including with that second Iran, Walid, that you're talking about. Polls show vast majority of Iranians. I suspect the more pro-American they are, the more they like this deal. So this is not simply a deal that the elite likes. Others like it because they want their economy to prosper. The third point is what President Trump has done is not say solely to the Europeans, come with me on ballistic missiles and on other things, because they were there. He's saying, let's add elements that Iran is going to have to comply with. Otherwise, we're going to restore the nuclear sanctions, not the unilateral sanctions, the nuclear sanctions which were lifted as part of the deal. So he's really telling them, come, help me violate this deal, or I'm going to violate it alone. And that's the kind of ultimatum that I would hope, and Crisis Group just had a report on this, so suggesting steps that Congress, the U.S. Congress and Europe could take so that if President Trump decides to walk away, the deal nonetheless could survive, because that's essential to make sure that Iran doesn't escape these constraints.
The other perspective is that the Iran deal is the Iran plan. So yes, the Europeans are happy, the previous administration was happy, Congress wasn't very happy, because what they've gotten was $150 billion to the regime, not to the economy of the people, and the liberty of developing their long-range missiles, and the liberty basically of expanding in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. So what the Trump administration is trying to do is to say, let not allow that deal to basically allow the Iranians to do what they're doing. They need to stop their behavior. If the Europeans can pressure the Iranians to stop the behavior, maybe the deal is not that bad.
You know, this was a deal to address what, I think at the time, if you go back 2014, 15, what was Prime Minister Netanyahu railing about? What were others railing about? Was this fear that Iran was going to acquire enough enriched uranium to build a bomb. That path has been stopped, and nobody could deny that. These other issues people have been dealing with for a long time, before the nuclear deal, after the nuclear deal. We could talk about how to deal with them, but let's not hold the nuclear deal hostage, which is the only agreement that has changed Iranian behavior since the revolution, really, has been this one. And so we want to sacrifice it in order to do other things, which we've been unable to do now for decades. That doesn't make any sense, and it would be really taking a huge gamble.
Now, you worked under Barack Obama, who his obsession, you could say, coming in after George W. Bush, was mission creep, mission fatigue after long campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq. Is that forgotten now in the U.S., in Washington?
Listen, President Trump was also elected on a platform that was no more wars, bring America home, America first. And by the way, the other, Bernie Sanders also was campaigning on this notion that the U.S. was overextended abroad. So I don't think that is forgotten. We're still at war. We're still present in Afghanistan. So that, the longest war in United States history, is still ongoing. So I think there is fatigue. I do think at the same time, and you spoke about the military people in the administration, there is a feeling among them, maybe, that Obama went too far and that they need to restore a sense of U.S. deterrence, and that, I think, explains some of their approach to the Middle East. But I think the overall sense that the U.S. should not again get involved in and get dragged into a long war in the Middle East, I think that remains the predominant popular feeling.
Well, the real beef with the previous administration is basically that it's not telling the American public that we are under a threat from the Iranian regime and the jihadi network enough. That's what the Trump administration is trying to change.
All right. And there's, of course, another spanner in the works of all this, another power that's present now more so than before, and that's Russia. Russia, which is weighing a lot both on the international stage and even on U.S. domestic politics. We're going to get the view from Moscow on Donald Trump. with Thomas Lowe, our correspondent. Thanks to you both, gentlemen.
Ilya Vasilyev founded a school for hackers in his apartment a little over 20 years ago. He's taught hundreds of students since then, and he can confirm that the Russian state is very interested in programmers.
I've taught a lot of hackers, and some of them have been targeted by the security services and other organizations.
For Ilya, hacking is first and foremost an art that mustn't be used for criminal purposes. But he's hardly surprised that Russians schooled in IT will be attracted to work for the authorities.
The government is encroaching on civil rights. It also puts pressure on IT experts. Many go overseas because of the greater opportunities to earn more money and evolve professionally. Those who stay in the country are often targeted and used by the government for illegal purposes.
The Russian state has always denied any link with the hackers said by cybersecurity companies to have hacked into the Democratic Party during the US presidential campaign. The scandal surrounding election interference is the issue weighing most heavily on Russian-American relations. Russia's Foreign Affairs Ministry, meanwhile, doesn't waste an opportunity to criticize Washington. Like at the end of last week, when US citizens were warned not to travel to Russia because of the terror threat.
In our opinion, this is another unsubstantiated allegation, which aims to inject yet another round of anti-Russian hysteria in the United States, to cultivate real fear of Russia among Americans.
The US is expected to announce a new wave of sanctions against Moscow by the end of the month, this time against oligarchs close to Vladimir Putin.
What the Russians make of what's going on in Washington, we're going to put this question to longtime diplomat, to Avis Bolin, who is with us. Thank you for joining us. Avis, your remit throughout your long career at the State Department included everything from, the Balkans, the former Soviet bloc. You were in Paris. What do the Russians make of what's going on here?
Well, one would like to know. I think they're as baffled as the rest of the world. I think that they are probably quite disappointed from what they might have expected at the beginning, because we don't know where the Russian investigation is going to come out, but it's clear that there was a lot more contact between some of the Trump people and the Russians than we previously knew. And I think they might have had good reason to hope that a Trump administration would be more willing to mend relations with Russia, maybe to do something about the sanctions. But I think since then, they have probably been disappointed. The sanctions have been renewed. The military budget is up. And there's really no sign that the United States is ready for any kind of rapprochement.
Because the rest of the world's scratching its head. You have, as you say, this increased military budget, Vladimir Putin saying the relations have never been worse. And at the same time, the man in the White House seems to have a penchant for the Russian president.
He does indeed, and I think it's puzzling to all of us. And
What's your take on it? What do you...
Well, one possibility is he had visions of himself doing a deal with he's the man of deals, we know that. And he might have envisaged himself sitting down with Putin and saying, look, Vladimir, let's get this stuff out of the way, and many things we need to cooperate on. And by the way, we are still cooperating with Russians on some of the more difficult issues, on Syria up to a certain extent, on the and so far the Iran deal. So it's not a totally black or white position. But I think what Trump thought was that he could be a deal maker in here, and I think he's disappointed that that opportunity is not there. But we have 3 more years, so let's see.
We have 3 more years. You mentioned there's that Russia investigation. What's 2018 going to bring?
I wish I could say. I think nobody really knows. Mr. Mueller has kept his cards very close to his chest, which is as it should be. There have been no leaks from him. And I think he is continuing methodically to do his his job and to follow the investigation where it will lead.
Did you ever think there'd be a U.S. president like this with, you know, in his entourage during the campaign, people who are openly close to Ukraine's former pro-Russia strongman and this kind of thing?
No, it's incredible. I have to say, I think sometimes people think it was odd that people in the Trump campaign talked to Russian diplomats. That's what diplomats do, and it's their business to talk to opposition candidates just as well as the government. But that's, of course, a separate question of whether something might have been promised or intimated in some of these conversations that was inappropriate. And we may never know the full of it. But there are many, many questions out there, and I think this is something we're all going to be following with intense interest.
Do you miss the old days when it was us and them, as you were during the Cold War?
It was certainly simpler. Yeah. You knew what the task was, and I had a wonderful career. I wouldn't have traded 1 minute of what I did for anything in the world, okay. And it was a very exciting time, and especially I have to say the most exciting was the years after the wall came down and watching that, and then having the developing relationship with Russia that we did after that, and we really hoped that might be a lasting condition, but unfortunately it didn't for reasons that would take a very long time to go into.
All right, on that score, the future is unwritten, but let me ask you about the future of the State Department. You left for good last July. What's going on there? What's the mood inside of the State Department?
I think it's a very, very depressing situation.
Depressing?
Yes, because there are many, many positions that aren't filled, many ambassadorships, many assistant secretaryships, many senior positions. From what we hear, Mr. Tillerson relies a great deal on the policy planning staff, which is a limited number of people. He's not really using the career people as he should. And he came in wanting to reorganize the State Department before he even knew why it was organized the way it was.
Yeah, so this gutting of the State Department, is that improvisation or is it a plan?
I think, I don't know Mr. Tillerson, of course, but I think he thinks that the State Department can be run the way a well-organized corporation can be run. And I remember George Shultz, who was a wonderful Secretary of State, saying under Reagan, saying that he had run a great many corporations in his time, and he had learned that if he came in and saw something that was organized in a weird and incomprehensible way, that he had to understand why it had been organized that way before he tried to change it. And I don't think Mr. Tillerson did that. And that's certainly not to say that the State Department couldn't use some reorganization, some streamlining. But I think he would have done a better job if he had waited, if he had consulted.
If you consolidate. Avis Bowen, one final question for you. Through all the chaos and what you were calling the depressing times for U.S. diplomacy, the United States is still the place the rest of the world looks to. They're watching this chaos. It's the place that grabs all the attention. Has the U.S.'s standing on the world stage really diminished?
We are a very formidable power, and I think business in most of the world cannot be done without some involvement by the United States. But we have allowed ourselves to become absent. I think there has been a definite retreat of U.S., what I would call the soft power presence of diplomacy, and really, I think, a denigration of diplomacy generally. There's a saying in the U.S. government that if the only instrument you have is a hammer, every problem becomes a nail. And the only instrument that we build up is the military one. And I think the diplomatic instrument has been undermined and downgraded. And I worry that even in the future, it will be hard to build up again.
To build up again. Avis Bowen, many thanks for speaking with us. Avis Bowen sounding the alarm when it comes to U.S. soft power. We've come to expect the unexpected out of Washington, and with the Republicans controlling both houses of Congress, don't expect that to change. That is until the midterms. Those are coming up in November. Yes, 2018 is an election year in the United States. That's a whole nother story, though. Thank you for joining us for this special edition from Washington. I'm François Picard. More on our website, France24.com.